Emma decided to stay for 1 month. She called her boss in London and explained that she needed time to sort out her grandmother's affairs. It was not completely true, but it was easier than trying to explain about the whispers that filled the house each night. She bought cleaning supplies from the small village shop and began working on the house, room by room. The shopkeeper, an elderly man named George, smiled when she told him her name. "You're Rose's granddaughter," he said warmly. "She talked about you all the time, said you had the gift. Just like her." Emma did not know what to say to that, so she just smiled and paid for her supplies. With each day of cleaning, the whispers became clearer and more distinct. Emma began to recognize different voices, and slowly, she started to understand their stories. In the kitchen, while she scrubbed the old wooden counters, she heard the voice of Mary, a young mother from the 1940s. Mary had lived in this house during the war while her husband was away fighting in France. She whispered about her fear and loneliness, about the long nights when she held her baby son and wondered if her husband would ever come home. But Mary also whispered about the kindness of neighbors who brought her food when money was tight, about the other women in the village who helped her care for her child, and about how Grandmother Rose had made her feel safe and welcome when she had nowhere else to go. Emma found an old photograph in the kitchen drawer, a young woman holding a baby, standing in front of the house. On the back, someone had written Mary and Little James, 1943. Emma touched the photograph gently and felt tears in her eyes. In the front parlor, as she dusted the old furniture and polished the wooden floors, Emma heard the voice of William, an elderly man who had rented a room here in the 1960s after his wife died. William spoke of his grief, of how empty his life felt without his beloved Sarah, of how he had considered ending his own life because the loneliness was too much to bear. But William also spoke of how Grandmother Rose had saved him. Every evening, she had brought him tea and biscuits and sat with him for hours, listening to his stories about Sarah. She had helped him remember the happy times instead of only the sadness. She had shown him that love never really dies. It just changes form. Emma found William's old pipe on the mantelpiece, along with a thank you card that read, "Dear Rose, you gave me back my will to live. I will never forget your kindness." The small bedroom upstairs, which had the best view of the garden, held the gentle voice of teenage Lucy. Lucy had lived here in the 1980s when her parents could not care for her anymore. Her father had left when she was young, and her mother struggled with drinking and could not provide a stable home. Lucy whispered about feeling unwanted and worthless, about believing that she was a burden to everyone around her. But she also whispered about how Grandmother Rose had changed her life. Rose had taught her to bake bread and make jam from the garden fruits. She had helped Lucy with her homework and encouraged her to finish school. Most importantly, she had helped Lucy believe she could make something good of her life. Emma found Lucy's old school books in the closet, along with a letter written in careful teenage handwriting. "Dear Rose, I got accepted to college. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. I will make you proud." As the days passed, Emma began to understand something important. These were not ghost stories or supernatural events. They were real people who had found safety and love in this house. Her grandmother had been more than just a landlady. She had been a healer, someone who listened and cared for broken hearts. Every night, Emma would sit in her grandmother's chair and listen to more stories. There was Robert, a young man who had struggled with drinking until Rose helped him find the strength to quit. There was elderly Margaret, who had been lonely after her children moved away, until Rose invited her for dinner every Sunday. There was David, a teenager who had run away from an abusive home and found refuge here until he was old enough to make his own way in the world. Each story was different. But they all had one thing in common. Grandmother Rose had seen their pain and had chosen to help, no matter how difficult or complicated their problems were. But as the voices multiplied and their stories grew more detailed, Emma began to feel overwhelmed. The pain in these whispers was so deep, so raw. There were dozens of people who had lived in this house over the years, each carrying their own burden of sadness and fear. Emma started to have trouble sleeping. She would lie in bed listening to voice after voice, story after story, until her own heart felt heavy with all their suffering. How had her grandmother managed to carry all these stories? How had she helped so many people without breaking under the weight of their sadness? Emma started to doubt herself and her decision to stay. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe it was better to just live a normal life and not get involved in other people's problems. Maybe some people were meant to help, and others were meant to just take care of themselves. As she sat in the kitchen one morning, exhausted from another sleepless night, Emma wondered if she was strong enough to handle this gift that seemed more like a curse. One rainy evening in late September, as Emma sat reading her grandmother's journal by the window, she heard a voice that made her heart stop, among all the whispers that filled the house each night. This one was different. This one was familiar. It was her grandmother Rose, and she was crying. Emma dropped the journal and stood up, her whole body trembling. The voice was coming from the kitchen, soft and broken with sadness. Emma walked slowly toward the sound, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. "I waited for you, Emma," the whisper said. And Emma could hear the pain in every word. "I waited for you to come home. I wrote you letters that I never sent. I called your number so many times, but hung up before you could answer. I was too proud to apologize, and you were too hurt to forgive." Emma sank into one of the kitchen chairs, tears streaming down her face. She had never heard her grandmother's voice among the whispers before. She had begun to think that Rose's spirit was at peace, that only the troubled souls remained in the house. "Your mother was afraid of the gift," Rose's voice continued. "She was afraid of feeling too much, afraid of carrying other people's pain. When she was young, she would cry for hours after hearing the whispers. She said it hurt too much to care so deeply. But you, dear child, you have a kind heart. You could help people like I did. If only you would let yourself try." Through her tears, Emma began to understand more about her family's history. Her grandmother's voice told her things she had never known. Stories about the women in their family who had always been able to hear the pain of others and help heal it. Emma learned that her grandmother had spent 6 years in this house, taking in people who needed help. There had been single mothers with no money and nowhere to go. There had been elderly folks with no family who were dying of loneliness. There had been young people who had run away from terrible situations and needed someone to believe in them. Rose had listened to all their stories, helped them heal their broken hearts, and sent them back into the world stronger than before. She had never asked for money or praise. She had simply opened her door and her heart to anyone who needed help. "I kept a record of everyone," Rose's voice whispered. "Look in the bottom drawer of my desk. You will see how many people found hope. In this house, you will see what our gift can do when we are brave enough to use it." Emma went to her grandmother's old desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a thick folder filled with letters, photographs, and newspaper clippings. There were thank you notes from people whose lives had been changed by Rose's kindness. There were wedding invitations from couples who had met while staying in the house. There were graduation announcements from young people who had finished school with Rose's help and encouragement. But as Emma read through the papers, Her grandmother's voice grew sadder. "I died alone," Rose whispered. "The doctor said I had at least 6 months, but I got sick quickly at the end. I died hoping you would come back and continue what I started. I died hoping our family's gift wouldn't die with me. I was too stubborn to call you, and you were too angry to visit. We wasted so many years because of pride and hurt feelings." Emma broke down completely, sobbing until her whole body shook. She had been so busy with her career in London, so focused on proving that she could succeed without her family's help. She had been angry about their argument for so long that she had forgotten why they had fought in the first place. The argument had been about Emma's sensitivity, about her ability to sense other people's emotions so deeply that it sometimes made her sick. Rose had wanted to teach Emma how to use this gift to help others. Emma's mother had wanted to protect Emma from the pain that came with caring too much. Emma, caught between them, had chosen to run away rather than deal with the conflict. Now, she realized how selfish she had been. While she was building her career and living her independent life in the city, her grandmother had grown old and died alone, waiting for a granddaughter who never came home. The guilt was too much to bear. The whispers were too painful to listen to anymore. Emma decided she would sell the house after all and return to London as quickly as possible. She called a real estate agent the next morning and scheduled a meeting for the following week. But that night, something changed. The whispers that filled the house were different. Instead of sadness and pain, Emma heard something else in the voices: forgiveness, love, and hope. The voices seemed to be speaking directly to her now. "It's not too late," they whispered. "You can still choose to help. You can still make a difference. Your grandmother's work doesn't have to end with her death." Emma spent the whole night walking through the house, listening to every story, every whisper of pain that had somehow been transformed into wisdom and strength. She began to understand that the people who whispered in this house were not trapped or suffering. They were sharing their stories so that others could learn from them, so that their pain could become someone else's healing. By morning, Emma knew what she had to do. The morning before the real estate meeting, Emma was sitting on the front porch drinking her coffee when she noticed an elderly woman working in the garden next door. The woman was carefully watering a row of bright yellow flowers that grew along the fence between their properties. Emma walked over to introduce herself. The woman looked up with a warm smile and wiped her hands on her gardening apron. "You must be Emma," the woman said. "I'm Patricia Thompson. I live next door. I've been taking care of these flowers since your grandmother passed away. She planted them 40 years ago. And I promised her I would keep them alive." Patricia was 75 years old with silver hair and kind blue eyes. Her face was lined with wrinkles, but when she smiled, she looked much younger. Emma noticed that Patricia moved slowly, as if her joints were stiff, but her hands were gentle with the flowers. "Your grandmother, Rose, saved my life," Patricia said simply, as if she was talking about the weather. 40 years ago, when my husband left me with 3 small children and no money, Rose took us in. She didn't just give us a room. She gave us hope when I thought there was none left." Emma set down her coffee cup and listened carefully as Patricia told her story. In 1983, Patricia's husband had run away with a younger woman, leaving Patricia with no job, no savings, and 3 children under the age of 10. The bank was going to take their house, and Patricia had nowhere to go. I was standing in the village square with my children and our suitcases, crying because I didn't know what to do next. Patricia remembered. Rose saw us there and walked right up to me. She said, "Come with me, dear. No one should be alone when they're scared." Just like that, without even knowing my name, Rose had given Patricia and her children the large bedroom upstairs and had helped Patricia find work at the village bakery. More importantly, she had watched the children after school while Patricia worked, and she had listened when Patricia cried about feeling like a failure. Rose helped me believe I was strong enough to take care of my family, Patricia said. She showed me that being left by my husband didn't mean I was worthless. She helped me see that I could build a good life for my children, even without him. Patricia explained that many people in the village had similar stories over the years. Rose had been like a mother to dozens of lost souls. There was the teenage boy whose parents had died in a car accident. There was the young woman who had been hurt badly by someone she trusted. There was the old man whose children had moved away and forgotten about him. Rose had a gift for seeing people's pain and knowing exactly how to help them heal, Patricia said. She never judged anyone or asked too many questions. She just opened her door and her heart. Patricia looked at the house with sad eyes. The village needs someone like Rose again, she said. There are so many people struggling right now. Young mothers with no support. Elderly folks who are so lonely they go days without talking to anyone. Teenagers who feel like nobody cares about them. That afternoon, Emma sat in her car outside the real estate office, thinking about her conversation with Patricia. She looked at the contract in her hands, papers that would sell her grandmother's house to a family from the city who wanted to turn it into a vacation home. Emma thought about all the whispers she had heard, all the stories of people who had found safety and love in that house. She thought about her grandmother dying alone, hoping that Emma would continue her work. Then Emma tore up the contract and drove home. She called the real estate agent and cancelled the meeting. Then she called her boss in London and asked for an extended leave of absence, explaining that she had family business to take care of. Her boss was not happy, but Emma didn't care any more about her career in the city. Emma began making plans immediately. She decided to turn her grandmother's house into what she called the listening house, a place where people could come when they needed someone to care, someone to listen, someone to help them find their way. Emma used her savings to fix up the house and make it welcoming for visitors. She painted the walls in warm colors and bought comfortable chairs for people to sit in. She fixed the broken fence and planted new flowers in the garden. She created a large kitchen where people could share meals together, and a quiet room where people could talk privately about their problems. Emma contacted the local social services office and the village doctor to let them know she was opening a community support center. She put up notices in the village shop and the church, explaining that anyone who needed help or just someone to talk to was welcome at the listening house. As Emma worked on the house, she noticed that the whispers were changing. Instead of just sharing their old pain, the voices seemed to be offering guidance, showing Emma how to help the living people who would soon walk through her door. Emma realized something important. Her grandmother's real gift had not been the ability to hear whispers from the past. Rose's true gift had been the ability to listen with love and respond with kindness to the people who were still early, and still suffering. Emma knew she was ready to use that same gift now. 1 year later, the listening house had become the heart of Millbrook Village. Every morning, Emma would wake up to the sound of people talking in the kitchen, sharing breakfast and planning their day. The house was no longer quiet and empty. It was full of life, laughter, and the gentle buzz of people helping each other. Every day, people came seeking help and comfort. Some stayed for a few weeks. Others just came for an hour to talk. Emma never turned anyone away. There was young Tom, a shy 18-year-old boy whose parents had thrown him out of their house when he finished school. They had told him he was lazy and would never amount to anything. Tom had been sleeping in the village park when Patricia Thompson found him and brought him to Emma. Emma gave Tom the small room upstairs and helped him find a job at the local bakery. The baker, Mr. Wilson, was a kind man who had known Emma's grandmother. He agreed to teach Tom how to make bread and cakes. Within 6 months, Tom had saved enough money to rent his own small apartment. But he still came to the listening house every evening for dinner and company. There was elderly Mr. James, a lonely 78-year-old man whose children lived far away and never visited. He had been getting thinner and sadder each month, spending his days sitting alone in his cold house with no one to talk to. Emma made sure Mr. James had company every day. She invited him for lunch and dinner, and she organized a group of volunteers from the village to help him with his shopping and housework. Soon, Mr. James was helping in the garden at the listening house and teaching the younger visitors how to grow vegetables. There was single Mother Alice, a tired 26-year-old woman who was struggling to raise 2 children while working 2 jobs. Alice cleaned offices at night and worked at a shop during the day, but she still could not earn enough money to pay for childcare and rent. Emma provided free childcare for Alice's children while she worked. The children, 5-year-old Sophie and 7-year-old Ben, loved playing in the garden and helping with simple tasks around the house. Emma also helped Alice learn computer skills so she could apply for a better job at the village. Bank. Every week brought new people with different problems. There was Robert, a middle-aged man who had lost his job and was too proud to ask his family for help. There was teenage Lucy, who felt like nobody understood her and was thinking about running away from home. There was Mrs. Evans, an elderly woman who was afraid to leave her house after her husband died. Emma listened to all of them. She made them tea and soup. She helped them find practical solutions to their problems, and most importantly, she made them feel like they mattered. One autumn day, Emma's mother, Margaret, came to visit the listening house. Margaret had not been back to Millbrook since she was a teenager, and she was nervous about seeing the place where she had grown up. As Margaret walked through the house and met the people who lived and worked there, her eyes filled with tears. She saw how Emma had transformed the sad, quiet house into a place of warmth and healing. "I was afraid of feeling too much pain," Margaret admitted to Emma as they sat together in the garden. "When I was young, I could hear the whispers too. But they made me so sad that I couldn't sleep worried. I thought if I ran away and lived a normal life, I could protect you from that pain." Emma took her mother's hand. "But I see now that feeling others' pain is what allows us to help heal it." Margaret continued, "You have your grandmother's courage. Emma, you are not afraid to care deeply, even when it hurts." The house still whispered at night, but now Emma whispered back. She added new stories to its walls, stories of people who had found hope when they thought there was none, people who had discovered they were not alone, people who had learned to believe in themselves again. Emma kept her grandmother's journal and wrote in it every day, recording the stories of everyone who found help at the listening house. She wrote about Tom's first successful day at the bakery, about Mr. James learning to smile again, about us getting promoted to assistant manager at the bank. Emma knew that someday someone else might need to read these stories and understand that even in the darkest times, there are people who care and want to help. The village of Millbrook became known throughout the county as a place where no one had to suffer alone. People from other towns would drive for hours to bring their troubled family members to the listening house, hoping Emma could help where others had failed. Emma became known as someone who listened not just with her ears, but with her heart. She had learned from her grandmother's whispers that every person carries both pain and strength, and that sometimes all they need is someone to believe in them. 2 years after opening the Listening House, Emma married David, a gentle schoolteacher who had started volunteering at the house and fell in love with both Emma and her mission. David helped run educational programs for the children and teenagers who came to the house as Emma tucked her own children into bed each night. Little Rose, named after her great-grandmother, and baby James. She would tell them stories about the importance of listening to others with love and compassion. Every person has a story, Emma would say softly as she smoothed their hair, and every story matters. When we listen with our hearts, we can help turn someone's pain into hope. The house that had once whispered with old sorrows now hummed with new joy, proving that sometimes the greatest gift we can give to another person is simply to care. Emma sat in her small car outside the old Victorian house, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. The August sun was setting behind the tall oak trees, casting long shadows across the overgrown front yard. She had been sitting here for 20 minutes, unable to find the courage to get out, after 3 years of working as a counsellor in the busy streets of London. Emma had inherited her grandmother Rose's house in the quiet village of Millbrook. The 29-year-old woman stared at the house where she had spent many childhood summers, before everything went wrong. She had not spoken to her grandmother for nearly 10 years. Not since their terrible argument about family traditions and things that Emma's mother called nonsense. The house looked tired and lonely, just like Emma felt. Paint peeled from its wooden walls like old skin, and the garden was wild with overgrown roses that had once been her grandmother's pride and joy. The white picket fence was broken in several places, and weeds grew tall between the garden stones. Emma remembered when this place had been full of life, when her grandmother would tend to every flower with loving care. As Emma finally stepped out of her car, she noticed how quiet everything was. Too quiet. There were no children playing in the street, no dogs barking, no sound of neighbors talking over garden fences. The silence felt heavy, as if the whole village was holding its breath. Emma walked slowly to the front door, her footsteps echoing on the wooden porch. The key felt cold and unfamiliar in her hand, even though she had carried it for 3 months since the lawyer had given it to her. She turned the lock and pushed open the door. Breathing in the smell of dust and old memories, the house was exactly as she remembered it, but smaller somehow. The furniture was covered in white sheets like ghosts, and sunlight filtered through dirty windows, creating patterns on the wooden floor. Emma walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects: her grandmother's favorite armchair, the old piano that no one had played in years, the kitchen table where they used to have tea and biscuits that first night. Emma made herself a simple dinner and tried to read a book in her grandmother's old bed. The mattress was soft but unfamiliar, and the room smelled like lavender and old perfume. She was just beginning to fall asleep when she heard them, soft whispers floating through the walls, so quiet that at first Emma thought it was the wind moving through the old house. But as she lay still and listened carefully, the whispers seemed to carry words, stories, gentle voices sharing their secrets with the darkness. Emma sat up in bed, her heart beating faster. She had heard these whispers before, many years ago, when she was a child staying with her grandmother. Back then, she had told her mother about the voices, but her mother had been angry. Emma's mother had always said the women in their family were too sensitive, that they heard things that weren't really there. Her mother had left Millbrook as soon as she could, refusing to believe in what she called grandmother's silly stories. She had taken Emma away from this place and never allowed her to return, not even for holidays. But Emma could hear them clearly now, just as she had when she was 7 years old. The whispers were real. They seemed to come from different rooms of the house, gentle voices telling stories of sadness and hope. of people who had lived and loved and suffered within these walls. Emma got up and walked through the house in her nightgown, following the whispers from room to room. In the kitchen, she heard the voice of a young woman crying softly. In the living room, she heard an old man talking about his loneliness. In the small bedroom upstairs, she heard a child's voice. Scared and asking for comfort, the voices did not frighten Emma. Instead, they made her feel sad and curious. Who were these people? Why could she hear them? What did they want? In the morning, Emma made herself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying to make sense of what she had experienced. The whispers had stopped with the sunrise, leaving the house quiet and ordinary again. Maybe her mother had been right. Maybe it was all in her imagination. Then she saw it, her grandmother's journal, sitting on the kitchen table as if it had always been there. Emma was sure it had not been there the night before. The leather cover was worn and soft, and the pages smelled like roses. She opened the journal carefully. On the first page, written in her grandmother's familiar handwriting, were the words for Emma. When she is ready to listen, every house holds memories, dear child. Some of us are meant to hear them. Emma's hands trembled as she read the words again and again. Her grandmother had known she would come back. She had known Emma would hear the whispers, just as she had heard them as a child. Emma closed the journal and looked round the empty house. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making everything look warm and welcoming. She had two choices: sell the house and return to her busy London life, or stay and discover what the whispers were trying to tell her. For the first time in years, Emma felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.